take a look at Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, and really the reaction of the people in attendance when it took place. So in John chapter 11, we're going to take a look. We're going to break it down into 4 different sections. And while we do this, I do want to bring you back to one of the rules, one of the aspects, one of Cooper's rules regarding the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is always at play with what we refer to as the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. See, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are really close to each other, and then John's just telling almost seemingly a different story with the same character. But what's happening is John's always at play. He's telling the stories of Matthew, Mark, and Luke from a different perspective. Because what we have in church history is we know that Mark wrote Peter. It's backwards. Peter was the one who transcribed the Gospel of Mark. It was written down by Mark. He would go around to different churches and he would tell the gospel of Jesus Christ, and then one church kept asking him over and over and over, will you write this down for us? That way we'll have it when you leave. And Peter kept saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not how our culture works. It's all oral. And so while he's doing this, you've got the tax collector Matthew, he's telling the gospel. You've got John going around telling the gospel as well. There's this interplay, stories that are constantly being told. And so when someone is coming and telling a story, you want different perspectives and aspects of it. And that was what John is doing. And so in John's gospel, you have Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Well, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the only reference to Lazarus is in a parable. In Luke chapter 16, the rich man and Lazarus. You also have reference to Mary and Martha in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but there's no reference to them ever having a brother named Lazarus. And so for the longest time, some people in church history would say that Lazarus was just an obscure figure, probably filler for John. Well, in fact, we've actually found a tomb in Bethany with the name Lazarus on it, which is really kind of incredible that they think now, archaeologically, we can't prove that's Lazarus's tomb, but there's a lot of coincidences if it's not his tomb. And so now we can see that, yeah, there actually is history that's involved here, that John is going on a lot more with reality. He's more aware of what's going on and telling the story than a lot of us in church history assumed, than him just telling a theological gospel. So he's got a narrative of Jesus raising someone from the dead, and Jesus raising the dead, it's pretty rare in Jesus' ministry. We talk about it, Jesus references it, you'll see the dead walk, but there's 3 instances. You have Jairus' daughter, which is recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You have the widow's son at Nain in Luke chapter 7, and then Lazarus. These 3 instances where he raised people from the dead. Could there have been many more? Absolutely. John says in John chapter 21 that if everything about Jesus was told, it would fill up all the libraries in the world. But we have this. We have John chapter 11, the only story that John contains of him raising someone from the dead. And why not include the story of Jairus' daughter, which the others have? Why not include the widow's son at Nain? Well, John knew those stories were already written down. So he's telling a different story than what Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have together. And so that's one thing we have to understand with John's gospel. Matthew, Mark, and Luke doesn't contain it, but John is always aware of what's going on in those other gospels. He's telling his perspective. He's telling his side, and that's why it doesn't always add up. So let's take a look at this. We're going to start John chapter 11, verses 1 through 6, and then we'll break these down. So this sets up the setting of John chapter 11. Now a man was sick, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. And it was her brother Lazarus who was sick. So the sisters sent a message to him, Lord, the one you love is sick. When Jesus heard it, he said, this sickness will not end in death, but is for the glory of God, so the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. So a few things to talk about when looking at 1 through 6, the setting that's going on here. Very often, especially in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus goes to Bethany quite often during the Passover week. But it is of interest, and people have noted, Bethany is a place that usually someone is sick in reference to Bethany. So in Jerusalem, you have healings that go on there, people get sick. Jerusalem's 2 miles away from Bethany. Well, what they now are beginning to think, maybe Bethany was a location where sick people went. Because according to Jewish tradition, if you were sick, you could not be within the city. You had to almost quarantine yourself. They didn't have hospitals, didn't have medicine, didn't have any type of practical care like we have today. If you were sick in any regard, you go outside of the city. You get away from people so that way they don't risk infection as well. And so maybe Bethany was one of these. It is just interesting they're always sick. So he meets with Mary and Martha, who are there. And it says that he loved them very much, loved the brother Lazarus, and they tell him that Lazarus is sick. So notice what he tells Martha, or the messenger. Mary and Martha sent a messenger to him. This sickness will not end in death. So we'll come back to that. But then he goes on. It says he loved them. Look at verse 6. When he heard he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. As we continue to read, we're going to see that Lazarus had been dead for 4 days when Jesus arrived. And so the question really becomes, if he loved Lazarus so much, why did he stay 2 more days? I mean, he told Mary and Martha, your brother's, he's not going to die. He's going to live. This sickness will not result in death. But he stayed 2 more days. And so you have a lot of theological discussion. Did Jesus know he was going to raise someone who was dead? Well, what is the nature of this? And I think we need to understand they lived in a different culture than we do. Where, one, he was sick. He wasn't necessarily dying right then and there, but also they weren't as hard pressed for time as we are today. If you go back 100 years ago, well, there were certain days that you would travel, there were certain days you go into town, or you go and take care of your business, run your errands, whatever it may be. That's exactly why we vote on the days that we vote. So the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Why in the world did we choose that date? Because whenever political scientists decided, writing the Constitution, when we're going to vote, when election day is going to take place, they realized that day is probably the most boring day ever. First of all, it's a Tuesday. Whoever is doing anything on a Tuesday? Well, the first Tuesday after the first Monday. Well, that's so obscure, you could probably plan anything around that day. But also, they knew Wednesday was the day you went into town to buy vegetables. And so you were already planning to go and even go to church on Wednesday as well. So up until really the advent of cars, things were just not done at a split minute's notice. And so even today, if you've ever done anything in, say, Latin America or Asian countries or pretty much anywhere outside of the Western world, if you're going to a church service and it starts at, say, 10 o'clock, that for the people who live in those countries, that's when you start getting ready to go to church. I've had missionaries that go and they serve in Mexico and in South America, and 12 o'clock was service. They get there, they're ready to go. They've poured over their message over and over and over to make sure it's good to go. And it's an hour before the first person shows up. And then they don't start for maybe 2 hours later. Time isn't as important there. And we may find that strange, but other cultures find things that we do to be very strange as well. The very fact that we own so many cars. If you go to Europe, they're walking or riding trains everywhere, riding buses everywhere. Having ice in your drinks. Other countries, they drink hot tea. You try to give someone from Mississippi hot tea, well, that gets you kicked out of church. Absolutely. The number of televisions that we have in our house. 5, 6 televisions, more TVs than rooms that we have in it. Now we're putting televisions in our showers. When you look at lists of what other countries find strange about America, they almost always include the red Solo cups. They always see Americans at parties drinking red Solo cups, and they're absolutely amazed to find out that no, we really do drink from red Solo cups. Everybody drinks from red Solo cups. They'd be at home and we drink from red Solo cups. They just thought it was some kind of prop that's used in movies. Cold butter. Anyone keeps their butter out so it'd be warm when you go to use it? That is pretty much an American thing. Paying waitresses, the same thing. And that we don't pickle much anything at all. Other countries are big on pickling. So, you know what? We're strange enough to other countries, so maybe some of the things they do can be strange as well. But time really wasn't that serious for them. So Jesus could have planned on staying there for another week. But he went ahead and moved his plans up after he heard that Lazarus was sick and decided to just stay for 2 days. And we'll find out why he may have not wanted to travel as we read verses 7 through 16. Verse 7, then after that he said to his disciples, let's go to Judea again. Rabbi, teacher, the disciples told him, just now the Jews tried to stone you, and you're going there again? So right there, he says, 2 days later, let's move. And the disciples are saying, you're crazy. They just tried to kill you, and you're wanting to move now? Well, actually, it's probably because Jesus was ready to go see Lazarus. So we talk about 2 days, but we got to get out of our 21st century mindset. So he tells them, aren't there 12 hours in a day? Jesus answered, if anyone walks during the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks during the night, he does stumble because the light is not in them. He said this and then told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him. So he tells them, essentially, you're thinking of darkness. You're thinking if we go and travel, that the worst case scenario is going to happen, but you're walking with the light of the world. See, Paul goes through this as well when he says that whatever is holy, whatever is righteous, whatever is peaceful, think about these things. Because here's the thing, he's not telling you need to have your head in the clouds. He's trying to tell you that if you're constantly thinking about things that are negative and things that are dark, you'll never see the good in the world. They don't want to travel and be with Lazarus because someone's going to try to kill Jesus. And Jesus is telling him, no, walk by the light of the world. See the good in everything. There's so much bad that we can easily become overburdened and overwhelmed. We need to look at the good. And he told him he's fallen asleep, but he's going to wake him. Verse 12. Then the disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will get well. Jesus, however, was speaking about his death, but they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. So Jesus then told them plainly, Lazarus has died. I'm glad for you that I wasn't there so that you may believe. But let's go to him. Then Thomas, called Twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go too, so that we may die with him. Not the most positive or happiest, I guess, apple in the bunch there, Thomas the twin. But when Jesus arrived, looking down at verse 17, we see right here as they're going, before we delve into the next verse, Jesus was on a mission. He knew what was going to happen. See, even though he had given 2 days, he knew the miracle that was going to take place. And we're going to see that even in the midst of death, it will not be final for Lazarus. It will result in life. So, verse 17, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, less than 2 miles away, Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. As soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. But Mary remained seated in the house. When Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, your brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." "Your brother will rise again," Jesus told her. Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world." We'll pause there and say Jesus is now talking with Martha. Mary is staying inside. And this conversation that he's having with Martha really does parallel, and reveal the second Cooper's rule of the Gospel of John. Anything that happens once in John happens again. And so you have in John chapter 4, Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman at the well who's saying to him, making excuses when he says that you've got more than one husband, and she ends up saying that she wants to believe that he's the Messiah and then confesses him as the Messiah and tells everyone in Samaria. You've got a similar type discussion going here with Martha as well. He says to her, Lazarus is going to rise again. And what does she say? "I know he'll rise again in the last day, when the Messiah returns." Because that was kind of their expectation. That was their hope. When the Messiah comes at the end of time, those who are dead will rise. This is what Paul talks about in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. He says that do not be alarmed by this, that when the end of time comes, those dead in Christ will rise first, and then we'll meet them in the sky and go afterwards. Matthew says the same type of thing in Matthew chapter 27. When Jesus died on the cross, you had people coming out of their graves. But she was talking about something they expected during that time, that at the end of time, we understand this, the dead will rise. But he tells her, no, you misunderstand. I am the resurrection and the life. Your hopes for the future are found in me, because he was the fulfillment. But then in verse 27, she says, "I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world." There's still nothing there about raising Lazarus from the dead. So we get another side of the story. Now he's going to talk to Mary, verse 28. "Having said this, she went back and called her sister Mary, saying in private, 'The teacher is here and is calling for you.' As soon," verse 29, "as Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw that Mary got up quickly and went out. They followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to cry there. As soon as Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.'" He was deeply moved. When Jesus saw her crying and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was deeply moved in the spirit and troubled. We'll pause there because this is an interesting passage with verse 33 and how Jesus responds. So mine says he was deeply moved in the spirit. How many of yours has angry? He was angry in the spirit. That tends to be a popular translation, and we know in church history the word angry was used because emotions were frowned upon in the Greek culture. But the word used here, Jesus saw her crying, saw the Jews crying, and he was deeply moved, or he was angered. It's actually a really strong word, used whenever you're pretty much yelling at someone. It's a sign of such emotion. You're being expressive in it. We could probably use this word in Greek in a brimisato to describe Jesus's attitude when he overturns the tables in the temple. He's actually really angry. But what we have, he probably he's about to cry in verse 35. He becomes overwhelmed with emotion. It's probably a very strong word. Jesus was talking to Martha, then he was talking to Mary. Mary fell at his feet and started crying and was emotional, and he probably became overwhelmed with emotion as well. Because we do need to understand, Jesus was quite human. We tend to forget about that as we exalt his divinity, that he did cry, and the writer of Hebrews says that he was tempted. So Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews crying with her. He was deeply moved and troubled. "Where have you put him?" he asked. "Lord," they told him, "come and see." So Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Couldn't he have opened the blind man's eyes and have kept this man from dying?" So Jesus goes and he weeps. And I think we all may be able to relate to his experience. You hear of someone passing away and you hold it all together. You keep yourself from crying. But once you see what is going on, you go to the wake, you go to the funeral, then the emotions take over. And that's probably exactly what's just happened here. Jesus is seeing the people that he loves and he's seeing their emotion, and now he's becoming emotional as well. Because the thing is, he can relate to us. Because he was human. And so we have this background. You have the reaction with Martha, you have the reaction with Mary. And so they're distraught. Jesus, the brother, has died. Both of them say, Lazarus has died. If you were here, then he would have lived. And some would say that, well, they clearly didn't believe that he could raise the dead. But you have to go back and realize in verse 4, or at least recall in verse 4, he told them that the sickness would not result in death. So they were fully expecting Lazarus to be healed. Well, now we're going to see what Jesus is going to do. Lazarus has died. He's going on this mission to go and save Lazarus. And now what is he going to do? He's going to raise him from the dead. And so let's take a look. We're going to take a look at two verses, 38 and 39. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was laying against it. "Remove the stone," Jesus said. Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, "Lord, there is already a stench, because he has been dead for 4 days." So 2 things to know about these 2 verses. One, he's been in there 4 days. He smells bad. They don't even want to remove the stone. Like, Jesus, can't you do it on the other side of the stone and let him come out? We don't want to smell this stuff. But the second thing is he's been in there 4 days. Theologically, that's pretty significant. It took 4 days, they believed, for a soul to leave the body. So after that 3rd day, he was really dead. If you've ever seen the movie The Princess Bride, anyone know Princess Bride? So Disney has got it. They're about to put it on Disney Plus, but it kind of makes fun of the medieval era. But you've got the main character, Wesley. So Wesley's put on an aging machine. He gets aged too much and he dies. So another character in the movie, Inigo Montoya, takes Wesley to go see Miracle Max, who's played by Billy Crystal. So he takes him to Miracle Max, thinking that Miracle Max may be able to heal him. They bring him into the house. They set Wesley on the table, and then Miracle Max starts to ask Wesley a question. Inigo Montoya tells Miracle Max that Wesley is dead. He can't talk. So Miracle Max then responds. He says, "Woo-hoo-hoo! Look who knows so much. It just so happens that your friend here is mostly dead. There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead. Mostly dead is slightly alive. With all dead, there's usually only one thing you can do." Inigo Montoya asked him, "What's that?" Miracle Max said, "Go through his clothes and look for money." See, being mostly dead, we tend not to think of that as well with the way the morticians work and embalming works, but mostly dead was an issue throughout most of history. If you've never heard of safety coffins, Those were a thing, especially during the medieval era, because you weren't really sure if anyone was absolutely positively dead. In 2014, they were about to embalm someone who's going to die. Let me make sure I get it right. 79-year-old Walter Williams in 2014. He was in a body bag at the mortician when all of a sudden the guy started seeing the body bag kick around and move. Just before they could embalm him, they realized he wasn't dead, his pacemaker just went out. Long enough to make the doctors, it's hours that they're in the hospital before this happens. And he was alive, so it still happens even today, 6 years ago. Well, they would have these safety coffins, and there would be a little string in it that would go up to a bell. And you would pull the string and ring the bell for a period of days, and if you ever did that, that let them know that the person in this coffin they're not dead. Mm-hmm. That's where the phrase "for whom the bell tolls" comes from, because they ring that little bell to let them know they're still alive. But no. With Lazarus, he wasn't mostly dead. He was all dead. Completely dead. For 4 days. So you really had a miracle. This was something more than just resuscitating or reviving someone. Jesus was doing more of a miracle. So we're almost done. Let's take a look. Verses 40 through 45. So Jesus said to her, "Didn't I tell you, if you believed you would see the glory of God?" So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you heard me. I know you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I said this so that they may believe you sent me." After this, he shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." In John chapter 5, verse 25, Jesus says there will come a day when the dead will hear a shout and they will come to life. And so he shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Verse 44, the dead man came out, bound hand and foot with linen strips and with his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unwrap him and let him go." So he's performed this miracle. He is the resurrection and the life, the proof that is there that he is the Messiah, the one the Jews putting their hope in, that his promises, what he says, they do come true. He's done this miraculous event that no one in history could do. But look what happens. Verse 45, and then this will be our end. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he did believed in him. But some of them who went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. We'll keep reading. So the chief priests and the Pharisees convened the Sanhedrin and were saying, "What are we going to do since this man is doing many signs? If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." And it goes on to say that this is when they started looking for evidence to kill Jesus, because he raised a man from the dead. But we do know that Lazarus' resurrection, I haven't called it a resurrection, and for good reason. It's not the same as what Jesus did. Lazarus would eventually die again. His tomb, likely his tomb, is in Bethany. But Jesus never would. He's overcome death. And so we know because of who Jesus is, what he did, the testament to his character that we have in John and his death on the cross and resurrection, that we don't have to worry about death either. We have eternal life with him because he is the resurrection and the life.